So, I'm Andy Schofield. I'm from Refund My Stamp Duty. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a couple of stamp duty reliefs. So thank you for everyone who's here. Thanks very much, Steve, for inviting me and taking us on as a preferred partner to the PSN. Thanks for everyone who's attended. If you're watching a video, welcome. Now, as the people in the breakout room have been informed, I tend to waffle a little bit, so I've tried to keep this down so it shouldn't take more than maybe about 10 minutes. Yes, I'm talking about tax, but actually there's some good things here, so please don't fall asleep. So, stamp duty land tax, we all know about this. I'm not here to teach anyone to suck eggs. Obviously, you've got to pay tax if you buy a property over a certain amount. The basic amount at the moment is £250,000. It does depend on a couple of variables, so when you bought it and how much you paid for it. And then the more important bit at the bottom there is about, are there any exemptions or surcharges that apply to it? Now, a lot of people in the PSN, I'd imagine, will be well aware of this one. Even if you don't hit the bracket for standard stamp duty, if you're flipping properties or you have a portfolio of properties, then you're always going to pay 3% stamp duty on the value of it. So it means that almost a lot of people in the PSN, I'd imagine, will by default, going through these transactions, pay a minimum of 3%, if not more, if they go over the transaction value. Now, again, nothing I'm sure you're not unaware of. So there are several reliefs on stamp duty, which are HMRC reliefs, which effectively mean that can impact the amount of stamp duty that you have paid or you should have paid, or potentially you may have an opportunity to look to get retrospective relief on. So there's too many exemptions to list, but some of them, just to give you some examples, are first-time buyers. So first-time buyers have a higher threshold. Right to buy buyers, the stamp duty is calculated off the discounted amount of a right to buy property, which is heavily discounted, of course, from the council. Now, these things, of course, probably won't really apply to anyone in the PSN. One of the reliefs that's available is refund of second home, SDLT. And this means if you have a home and you buy a separate property to flip it and you sell it within a period of 3 years, then the 3% stamp duty you paid a second home, you can look for a full refund of. Interestingly about this, because of COVID, if there are extenuating circumstances, whereas the letter of the law says 3 years for this, if there have been problems to do with COVID, tradesmen, chains falling over and things like that, you can actually go back and write to HMRC and explain why it took a bit longer, and they will consider that still over the 3-year threshold. And then the bottom one is uninhabitable property, which is something that we specialise in supporting people with. Again, there's lots and lots of exemptions. I could be here all day, but again, I'll be waffling, which I don't want to. So what makes property uninhabitable? There's several things here really that are the considerations. There are certain kind of rules in kind of building regulations and the Homes for Human Habitation Act, which applies to landlords for tenants and so on. But effectively, considerations on these, can this person effectively live there comfortably? Is it fit for habitation? So can you sleep there comfortably? Now, this doesn't mean, is there a bed or not? That doesn't really count, not having a bed there. But if it's freezing cold and you can't sleep there, or there's serious noise pollution, there can be reasons why that is then not fit. So can you eat there? And fundamentally, this can be, is there a kitchen? Is there workspace? But this can have other things associated with it. For example, if there's no hot water, then kitchen hygiene goes through the window. And if you've not got hot water and you can't wash your hands, is that really habitable as an abode? So washing, again, human hygiene, staying clean, staying healthy. Being warm, it's well known that if you sit in the cold or in the cold too long, that prompts can be leading to poor health conditions, so not really fit for habitation. Is it safe? And again, if there's any kind of health and safety issues with simple things like, locks on the doors, and is there broken windows, and, is it accessible or is it safe and secure? And the main things are kind of healthy and hygienic. It's really about, is it a normal abode? If you've got mold on the wall, if you've got asbestos, If it's freezing cold and got damp, there can be a lot of things that then mean that in reality it wasn't actually fit for human habitation. So this is an interesting one. What's the problem? Why does this happen and who is to blame? Now, this is a bit of a funny one because effectively when a purchase goes through, as part of that purchase, the conveyancer will be asked a question on a form, the SDLT 1 form, saying, is this property eligible for relief? And it seems, I'm not aware of circumstances where it hasn't, but it seems that kind of standard practice is to not list a relief there. Now, it's kind of interesting that if you actually go on to HMRC's website, then there's a question on the form that says, are you claiming relief? And one of the reliefs is for uninhabitable property. Whereas you can see these type of reliefs funnily start at 8 and then go up to 36, where there's actually 48 of them. So when it comes to a conveyancer filling in overdue relief and none of these codes apply to it, then in reality, why would they do anything different? So what this means is, in essence, it's kind of commonplace that this is just as processed. People will often pay full stamp duty and a 3% surcharge, where actually this does apply, but unfortunately there's no code in the list to actually put that relief against. When it comes to the conveyancer or the involved in this, it's not a case of we're going to them and saying you've done something wrong or we're claiming against them. Really, I don't necessarily want to point fingers here, but at the same time, if you go on gov.uk and you look for uninhabitable, then you get the sum total of 0 relevant results. So you can imagine in this instance, it's not something you want to scream from the rooftop. They don't give you a code for it, but the real root cause of this is just a lack of understanding. We don't go to the solicitor and say, you've done something wrong. There's no real correspondence or claim involving it. What it is going to the HMRC and saying, here is your rule. And based on your rules, this relief is valid. And that's effectively where it's worked. So it's not a case of where there's a blame, there's a claim. It's a little bit different. It's more of a case of a relief was available, but there's been an oversight. And so retrospectively, we want to fix that kind of scenario. So a couple of examples. My friend Steve earlier noted that this little beach house on the moors was a stock image and 7,000 in stamp duty was not paid on that. So thanks very much, Steve. This is an example of Mr. A. He's paid £7,000 in stamp duty. The property was bought in disrepair. There was works to bring it to a living standard. It wasn't fit for safe and healthy human habitation. However, that wasn't the way that the claim went. It wasn't a case this person went and said, I've repaired a lot of this property, and so therefore I would like a refund of it. And the reason for this is that this person, when they sold their property, they then went down to one property. So they paid the 3% on second property surcharge. They then flipped it within about 12 months or so. And rather than going and stating elements of law and regulations to try and claim and say this was uninhabitable in retrospect, it was easier to just say, well, I've sold it now and I've only got one property left. And so in that instance, it led to a full refund, but without necessarily going down the route of uninhabitable. If it's ever easier to say, hi HMRC, I'm now down to one property and I've sold that, can I have the refund? It is considerably easier than looking to demonstrate an uninhabitable case. Now this, unlike the house in the moors, as Steve nicely suggested, this is a real case study, and this is the first success in our business. We've got Mrs. B, again, changed names on this, 7,000 in stamp duty, bought in disrepair, meaning 40k of works could be demonstrated by this customer, which is of course well in excess of this 7,000. The repairs included damp works, new boiler and heating. There was damp and mould. Without the works, it wouldn't have been fit for human habitation. I hate to bring up the young boy who unfortunately was affected severely because of black mold in a property. Without the works, then again, it wouldn't have been fit for human habitation. There's no way the Homes for Human Habitation Act, which governs landlords and tenants, would have legally been allowed to even rent that out in that kind of space. So because of the works and the lack of I suppose, normal kind of living necessities in that product, and because of the works that were undertaken, then that's then allowed us to demonstrate that this was uninhabitable. The work has been put in, and I think effectively this relief from HMRC is to make sure that you don't get old and derelict properties. When there's already a struggling housing market, there's higher demand than there is supply. Renovating, people flipping these properties is for the benefit. In Mrs R's instance, though, it wasn't her second home. Mrs R has a portfolio of properties, and so when she then flipped and sold that, then it didn't mean that she went down to one property, so she couldn't just say, can I have the second home tax back? There are instances like this where you could argue that if you need a new boiler because it's cold, it's not fit for habitation. However, trying to say I need 100% relief on £7 worth of SDLT against needing a new boiler might be a little bit tricky, nor does that seem to come up. What often seems to be the circumstance is similar to this: paid stamp duty, tens of £1,000s worth of investment because it was in a mess. You then get some really novel instances which just are entering ridiculous, which is you bought a car park with planning permission for residential property and you've been charged residential stamp duty where there's no building there, there's no kitchen, there's no toilet, there's no heating, it doesn't even exist yet. In instances like that, then that can either mean a full refund or at least an amendment for commercial and non-residential property. There are some kind of funny scenarios out there, but often it seems to be pretty clear cut. Sometimes people will move in and redecorate. It doesn't mean it's uninhabitable. If you have to move in, there's damp, there's asbestos, there isn't a toilet or bathroom, there isn't any heating. These things typically kind of indicate on their own, and the amount of work that it takes to repair that or to bring it to a suitable dwelling typically seems, from the numerous conversations we've had, to be well in excess of the stamp duty. So making a claim for a form of relief, so like any kind of claim or most things in life, you can make claims yourself. Lots of people don't have the time or inclination to understand or undertake the process. So I work for a claims management company, and like any claims management company in the world, it's for people who don't necessarily want to get into the ribs of it, spend the time, do the correspondence and so on. So our service is fully managed. It's based on successful claims and the experience, and it is no win, no fee. In terms of my details, I think that's possibly about enough waffle. I'm only 6 minutes in, I've done well. In terms of my details are here. It's by far from every property that obviously this is relevant to. It's worth ticking down the list and saying, if I'm flipping properties, go for the 3% or whatever that way. If in a legitimate instance, though, you have got a property where it's in such disrepair, you've had to plough a fortune into it, or you've knocked it down and started again, or it's not even a domestic dwelling in the first place, then these instances become quite kind of obvious where we can look to get a retrospective refund. So if you or anyone you know in your circles know anyone where this may be relevant to, then let's talk about it. My contact details are on the screen in front of you. Our website is refundmystampduty.co.uk. My name again is Andy at refundmystampduty.co.uk. So please email me, or ideally call me for a chat. If there's any questions or queries, or you're not kind of too sure about the stipulations around this, then we'd be happy to discuss it with you. And my number is 07929 594 267. So I think I've done pretty well there to not waffle too much. I hope you're happy with me, guys, because oh boy, I could have. Without going into too much depth, I think that's kind of the main takeaways of this. So of course, the I think there's a general awareness about the 3% second home, but if you think you've missed out because it's over 3 years, with everything that's gone on in the world, you can actually go back further. There's an awareness of that, but when it comes to uninhabitable, even finding the code to put the relief on the SDLT1 form at the conveyancer, it's completely missing. So there's this huge kind of lack of understanding. It leads to it almost being commonplace that in these circumstances you will have paid full tax, and if you are in those circumstances, then you need not have, and you can look to claim against it. So right, I'm going to take a breath. Yes,
Thank
I can feel my ears.
I'm sure we all agree if we can save some money, obviously going to HMRC, then that's the welcome addition to our coffers, not theirs.
Well, yeah, I think me and Umesh were speaking about estate planning, and it's the old cliche, death and taxes. And stamp duty is just another bloody one, isn't it? You know, we all want to be kind of tax efficient, but in this instance, it's more about some kind of avoidance or even necessarily efficiency. It's more of an oversight in that it seems completely lacking that any conveyancer on the face of the planet would ever put the code in for uninhabitable, because it isn't even on the notes for the form, and you can't really find anything about it, whereas in reality there is 100% relief of stamp duty against uninhabitable property.
Good to
Any
know.
questions?